Hello to everybody. Welcome to this video lecture, which is about Tunisian Kais Saied. It is in the frame of the master class History and Politics of the Middle East and North Africa at University of Rome htree. I am Fabio Meroni. Welcome. This lecture will be divided into three chapters. As you can see, we will talk first about the Kais Saied profile as a charismatic person and as a political vision. Then we will go to Kais Saied rise to power. In the second chapter, we will go through his path to taking power, which he holds until now. And then finally, in chapter 3, we make an assessment of what is Kais Saied Tunisia in between these categories of sovereigntism, authoritarianism, and populism. We'll find out which of these three categories is the best suitable to define his power system. So, since we need categories and we will deal with, let's give some short definition of these three key terms. First one, sovereigntism, is a quite new term. It comes from sovereignty, so it stresses out about the nation's allegedly lack of sovereignty in the world actual order. Sovereignty, as much as populism may be a right wing ideology or a left wing ideology, you find both versions. In a more leftist sovereignty, the sovereignty would be stressed out as against neoliberal economics, while a right wing version of it will consider the protection of the sovereign people from external forces or undesired new members. Usually speaking, external forces are supranational institutions like the EU in Europe or the United Nations, which is the case of Trump's, for example, ideology, or any other international system that put a frame to the nation's sovereignty. As for the developing countries, it's often the case with the financial institution like the FMI, first of all. Those sovereigntists that usually stress out a multipolar world against an hegemon, which is the American one, and they also stress out, this is important, cultural as much as political components. Authoritarianism, which is our second term, you may be more familiar with, generally speaking, in politics, is the blind submission to authority and the repression of individual freedom of thought of action. The authoritarianism does not afford civil liberties or political rights, and usually power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader or a small elite. Civil organizations are limited, and media freedom also are watched out, especially in regard to critical critiques to the government. Although some limited topics, some kind of topics which are not to face the government policy may be allowed. However, authoritarianism it's not there to define a single system. There is a variation of authoritarian rules. In contemporary times, at least since the 90s, authoritarian rules may incorporate legislature, political parties, and judiciaries. However, those institutions are usually limited, do not have much power, as well as the judge and the courts in the authoritarian regimes are usually dependent of the executive. Populism, our third term, another key one, is sovereigntism. It can be declined in right wing or left wing ideology. And the populism would be more specific in that it champions the common person. And it is usually contrasted to elite or the establishment, which are considered to take the real power off to the common person. Usually populism, sometimes similar to sovereignty, mean that oppose large business and financial interests, which are considered to take out of the people real power, as we said. and they tend to be critical to anything, an institution that mediates between the people and their leader. So populists may demand direct democracy. This is typical of populists, but when populists become authoritarian, they also revolve around the charismatic leader as much as they become authoritarian-like of political systems. So they claim to embody the will of the people. In this form of personalized politics, political parties, as it is logical, lose their importance, and elections usually serve to confirm the leader's authority. So, given those three definitions, we can try now to delve into our case, into the Tunisia case. Let's see, first of all, who is Kais Saied. This is in fact Tunisia's system today is very much revolving around this personality, which has been dominating the politics since 2019, and who has implemented, as we will see, a specific political system whose definition, whose typology we will define at the end of the lecture. So Kais Saied comes out in the period between 2011 and 2019 as an outsider, an intellectual outsider. Let's consider that between 2011 and 2021, we may say Tunisia was a kind of liberal democracy, considered in the regions being an exception because there was a parliament, multi-parties, freedom of press, free election. It was really a kind of democratic system, but it was dominated by political elites versus the rest of the people. And Kais Saied emerged on TV sets as a constitutional law professor, which speaks standard in Arabic, so he stresses out the kind of Arab and Muslim personality, culturally speaking. He's kind of charismatic, he has an eloquence which goes straight to the point, and he appears as a, of a different type compared to the corrupted political elite, and the mismanagement of the democratic rule. He also was known because of criticizing the 2014 constitution, which he thought was threatening the national parties instead of individual candidates and local governance. So, but what is the political identity or ideology of Kais Saied? As he spoke on a Nawat interview, which I went to consider as deriving his profile, his political profile, he is a person which has indeed an ideology, although he declares in this interview that he has no ideology, that his ideology is the Tunisian people. What he means is that he cannot be classified within the traditional ideology. This is common sense because we are not anymore in the period of the peak ideology. Even liberal ideologies today is not very much easily defined. So he is pretending to be his ideology. This is a quote: "Is the Tunisian people." This is already a populist element in this statement. He also stated in this interview that his program is to present tools for modeling a country in the mod as a local is based on local democracy, a direct representativeness, no mediation of the parties. You see this populist side already at this time. Where this interview was made in 2019 during the pause between the first and second round of the presidential election. So he also, he also declared that his vision of development is based on the people, local people, creating their own projects, which the state should be backing, should be helping to realize. He also stressed out education and health system. This was a kind of left-wing ideological statements, but he also considers Islam as an important part of his speech, of his ideological vision, although he's talking of Islam not like an Islamist, but as someone that considers Islam as an important part of the cultural specificity. This is why he stresses out what he calls the finality of Islam, which he says stressed on justice, more than on individual freedom. So, in consequence, he also considers himself in favor of human rights, but it's based on a contracted universalism. You see, the sovereignties that we mentioned here, it is emphasized because he is kind of culturalist. He considered the cultural specificity as important as to be to consider. In this case, Islam plays its role, but is also very pragmatic. And although in foreign politics he make a big stand in the electoral campaign in favor of the Palestinian cause, which will be always his reference point, but in practice, and he also is arguing about the same points typical of Tunisian political foreign politics, not that much in enmity with European unions, although making claims, as we said, sovereignist claims, is pragmatic, more or less in foreign policy. So he participated, he ran for president in 2019. It's very dry campaign. He is supported by young people. He does not have money. Is surrounded by people outsider from the political establishment. So he gets a strong grassroots support, and finally he win the 2009 election, and the rise to power starts from here. Between 2019 and 2021, we are within the 2014 constitutional frame, which is the frame of the democratic period, of the democratic decade, which ends in 2021. But in this constitution, there is a not well defined separation of power within the executive, which is shared between the premier, prime minister, and the president of the republic. So, Tunisia, in fact, in 2019, comes with a parliament which cannot express easily a government. Nahda is the majority party, but it does not have enough deputies and MPs to form a government. So more or less, the Fakh become prime minister is elected in February 2020. You see, after a long stalemate, and after 5 months, in fact, this Fakh prime minister fall into disgrace because of corruption investigation. So he resigned, and he is followed by his prime minister, Hisham Meshishi. Meshishi is considered starts a kind of a struggle of power between him and Kais Saied because of the issue on ministers. Saied starts to enter into the parliamentary life, starting to speak out against this mismanagement of the MPs and the negative image that they give as a political class, and so he's more and more entering into the issue of government. Although Fakh was one of his was appointed by him, Hisham Meshish now got himself in between the parliament, trying to claiming his his competence in government, in legislation, and in leading the majority to the government. Kais Saied comes in and he imposes ministers to the Meshishi government. So it's a struggle between the presidency on one side and the parliament. As there was not arbiter available because the constitutional court, although was drafted in the constitution, was never appointed because of the conflict between the MPs on the people to be appointed as members. So this crisis, this long crisis, finally comes to an end with a takeover, with a kind of coup, um, which is made by Kais Saied himself on July 25, 2021. So this is the moment, the year when the new Tunisia Kais Saied officially starts. It takes power amid an outbreak of violent anti-government demonstration against the backdrop of a month of stalemate in parliament, but also because of the COVID pandemic, which is giving to this stalemate an even more dramatic picture. So Said invoked emergency power and suspended the parliament. So in the year 2022, he starts to build up his own system. He suspends parliament and the constitution. He rules for 1 year by decree. So it's kind of personal, exceptional power period. On July 21, a new constitution is drafted after practically it was a personal constitution that he wrote by himself, although there were some advisors proposing in a draft. He personally, he was a constitutional law professor, then drew and designed his constitution the way he always thought of as previously when he was a constitutional professor. We said how his political program was very much based on drafting a new constitution. And so he, in the next legislation, which elected a new parliament. Remember, since 2021, there was no parliament. In December 17, 2022, there is the new legislative election with a very low turnout, 11%, and with practically all individual MPs being elected. So the parties were sidelined. This is another point of his program. As he always thought, you remember that those institutions were only an obstacle to a direct democracy. So, on the way to power in 2022, he also took control of the Supreme Judicial System, and he consolidated power in the executive branch thanks to the new constitution and diminished the independence authority of the parliament. So this is how the new Tunisia comes to be drawn. And so after this period of new constitutional building, the Tunisian Kais Saied Tunisia took a frame in the way we said, but let's give some example now of the Kais Saied Tunisia, the way Kais Saied has been governing in this period. Let's try to judge it from the perspective of our categories: sovereignties, authoritarianism, and populism. Let's get to a conclusion. So, the Kais Saied sovereign side, we may say, was seen in the issue of the financial of the IMF loan and of the reform of the central bank. It is a kind of financial sovereignty here. Against the backdrop of budget deficit, public debt, and reserves, exchange foreign reserves under pressures, Kais Saied needed to have access to the financial market. But after trying from 2023 for 2 years until February 2025 to negotiate an IMF loan, he finally broke down the agreement because he accused the institution to wanted to impose to Tunisia his own economic vision. So somehow he wanted to interfere into Tunisian sovereignty. That's how he expressed himself. So he favored autonomous management of its own economy. And in this respect, the bill was voted by the parliament and sanctioned by the government, according to which the central bank should be subdued to the executive authority, according to the principle that Said stated, quote, the state must have a single policy even if the institutions are multiple, end quote. So this is Said's vision. The central bank must serve the interest of the nation, and instead of a separation of powers, he claims and for a unity of the state within multiple institutions. This is in the name of sovereignty, of financial sovereignty. About populism, we may check the Kais Saied populism in the issue of the migrants. There was in 2023 a very dramatic crisis with migrants in Tunisia against the backdrop of the EU Memorandum of Understanding with Tunisia. It was one way. You see, this is also the pragmatism in the sense of Kais Saied because we try to have access to financial aid in other ways, alternative to the IMF. He went to look for money to Algeria and Saudi Arabia, but he also kept this agreement with the EU, which was based on July 2023 on the border management against financial support, which means that Tunisia was uh, had the obligation to keep the migrants away from Europe in exchange of financial support. But Said made more than that. And in May 2024, he applied a policy against the migrants which looks much more populist, a right wing approach. As he himself said in a famous speech that he addressed to the Security Council on May 6, 2024, uh, um, he said that there was a plot of ethnic replacement. You see, this idea that there is an external threat. The migrants were part of ethnic replacement of black people with Arabs. So he attacked civil society organizations, describing them as traitors, foreign agents, and quote angry voices in the pay of foreign powers. And quote, he announced also that the police forced the return of 400 people to the Libyan border, which means that in a very repressive and violent way, he took people on the street, on the square. He went to pick them up in their homes. He arrested the people that rent the apartments to the migrants, and then police by force took those people into the desert. Some of them met. So it was very dramatic, but a very typical populist action because it was stressed in the name of this kind of conspiracy of being an external element to threaten the people. So about authoritarianism, here we have quite a lot of chapters, 3 or 4 chapters. The first of all is the judiciary. In authoritarian system, very typically, the judiciary is put under control of the executive. So Kais Saied in February 12, 2022, you see, before even having the new constitution, dissolved the Supreme Justice Court, replacing it with the Provisional Judiciary Council, which does not have the same independence that the 2013 constitution granted to the judiciary apparatus. On June 2022, he gives power, the sole power to dismiss judges, and he does do, in fact, quite immediately. He executes the dismissing of 557 judges and prosecutors, accusing them of obstructing terrorism-related investigation, financial and moral corruption, and adultery. So, in the new constitution, it also divided the judiciary into 3 councils: judicial, administrative, and financial, making them easier to control. Also, the Constitutional Court, the senior jurists, which they are, I think, 1/3 of the whole of the Constitutional Court judge, was directly elected by the president, so to make it to be under the executive control as well. If this led also to what the rule of law index has declared the Tunisian downfalling into the 76th place in the law index from 56 in 2020, especially two famous cases in which the Tunisian authorities, in which the rule of law dropping was clear, First, when in February 2023, Tunisian authorities detained two of the judges who had been already dismissed in June 2022. Remember that in 2023 is a particular year of political opposition repression. This year when the biggest, most important political opposition leaders are incarcerated, are put in prison. And we have also another example of the way the justice is used by the executive power in the case of the second presidential election in the re-election of Kais Saied. That was October 6, 2024, when 8 candidates were disqualified from running in the election. Those candidates, after they were also sentenced to prison terms or lifetime bans on based on trumped up charges, including making donations to influence voters, spreading fake news and rumors. But some of those candidates challenged their disqualification, and they won their case in front of the administrative court. But notwithstanding the obligatory value of the administrative court sentence, the independent high authority for election refused to implement this decision. So practically, Kais Saied had the election he wanted with just two weak candidates, and he was re-elected, as we have seen, with a very high score, above the 97, I think, percent of votes, although a very low turnout. One last example of the authoritarian populist turn of Kais Saied rule was its very most recent case of this big trial against the political opposition, which was called, quote, the plotting against the internal external security of the state. So 40 people, it was in fact all political opposition leaders or journalists or intellectuals were arrested in the crackdown of 2023. They were put all together in this trial. But what happened, we are now in a very recent days, in March, just the last month, 2025, the court gathered on 4 March, but the families contested the decision of the judge to not have the physical presence in the courtroom of the defendants, which most of them were in pretrial detention. So the family protested. There was also there has been an up to date of this trial, which will be the next day, in maybe next week. It will be adjourned. In conclusion, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has repeatedly denounced the quote persecution of opponents end quote in Tunisia, stating that many of them quote have been convicted simply for exercising their rights and their freedoms end quote. Conclusion: what is a Tunisian Kais Saied? At the beginning, we saw Kais Saied stating almost a sovereignist political ideology, something that maybe many saw as a mix of left wing and Islamic ideology. But at the end, as an experience of his government, of his rule, he established a power system and a practice of the power which was more authoritarian, populist, and sovereignist. We did not talk about the foreign politics, but although he was stressing very much the Palestinian issue, he was not following through. In that, he was very pragmatic. It was not that sovereignist only in words. However, he expressed this kind of sovereignty ideology in the financial issue, although he was more populist or right-wing sovereignist in his practice of this idea of financial sovereignty, as we have seen, especially with the migrant issue and conspiracy theories with the plot against the state trial or the plot against the state, which is indeed just an authoritarian typical move to make a big trial against political opposition in the name of the state being threatened by external forces. So, modern sovereignties, Kais said Tunisia may be considered as an authoritarian populist form of government. Thank you for having followed this, following this lecture, and this is all. I will see you for the next time. Um, if you want to join the channel, I will be grateful.